Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode 68 of the Podcana podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing the 10K tournament that took place this past weekend, talking about all the new Set 5 decks that came out of that. Thank you so much, everybody, for 4,000 subscribers. That's a big milestone that we just hit the past few days. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, be sure to click on it down below. Really appreciate all of the support you guys have been showing on the latest episodes. And another headline is a Lorcana was announced for next Tuesday, which I suppose is probably going to be the Set 6 announcement. It's kind of crazy, Moyen. I feel like, we're still trying to cook Set 5 stuff and it's already like, oh, Set 6 announcement. It's kind of coming so fast, but it's always exciting. Hopefully we're going to get another spicy card reveal for that. But yeah, before we continue on with the podcast, Brendan is not with us this week, unfortunately. Past few weeks we've had a little bit of schedule changing due to he picked up a new job and time availability and stuff like that. But rest assured, myself and Moyen will carry you guys through this week's episode. We're gonna be talking about all of the Set 5 decks. We're gonna start off with our spilled ink section. But actually, before we do that, I'm gonna ask you, Moyen. You can tell I'm definitely not great at not as good as hosting as Brendan. Moyen, I'm going to ask you, how was your week in Lorcana? Have you been testing anything spicy? Did you play in any events or anything like that? How's your week been going?
Yeah, so I've been testing, playing some gauntlets of different matchups. I was quite busy coaching as well, so I've had a good time in Set 5. I think with now the first results from a little bit smaller tournaments, also the 10K, which actually had 186 players, we have our first few sets of data to really analyze and to get a sense of direction for what to play in the DLCs in Vegas and Birmingham coming up.
Yep, 100%. All right, we're going to kick it off here with the spilled ink section. This is our listener question section. If you guys want to have your questions read out on next week's episode of the podcast, be sure to pop your comment down below or also pop it in the Discord because I try to grab one or two from the Discord when I can. All right, we're going to start off with the Arc-like Battery. Says, you can already spend ink on your opponent's turn, but in very niche cases, if you hit any of the new Emerald Kicker cards off of a Mufasa on your opponent's turn, you can pay their additional cost for the extra effect. So this is in relation to, I think last week I mentioned, some judges were basically saying to the players during the challenge, make sure you have your whatever ink you spent, leave it exerted, and if you haven't spent some ink, leave it ready. And the example here is basically when they say kicker, I believe kicker is like a keyword from Magic. I'm not too sure. I think that's what it is. But basically the example is it's like the 1 cost Clarabelle, which is when you play her, if you can choose to pay an additional 2 ink to banish an item, or the Mother Gothel, which is if you choose to pay an additional 2 ink, you can bounce a card, I believe. So
it's three ink.
Oh, 3 ink is it? Okay, cool. Yeah, but that makes sense to me. Yeah. That's like a very niche scenario, but I guess it's relevant, right?
It's something that doesn't really come up, but the possibility of it coming up alone justifies you not.
You want to maintain the game. Yeah, you want to maintain the game state, right? Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's an interesting one. And a lot of people pointed out that comment to us. So thank you very much for that. The next comment is from Robbie C Gaming. Spilled ink. Seeing a lot of Ruby Sapphire lists are running Maleficent Dragon. Do you think this is going to be an essential card for this list in Set 5? Any alternatives you would experiment with? I mean, you're a resident red blue player on the podcast here, Moyen. What's your opinion on this card for the past few sets? Has it been a staple that you want to include in most decks, or do you think it's just very meta dependent? If the meta is a little bit slower, you can afford to play it. If it's a bit faster, do you think you have to cut it, or it still kind of makes the red blue cut? Because if you're still going to be ramping, maybe it's still necessary as a nice removal tool in there.
Yeah, so it's not even just the ramping alone that makes that card good, because even if you have enough ink against some decks, you'd rather spend 9-10 ink playing a few different cards than spending it all on this one big dragon that can only remove a single character. So I think in Set 4 it was a little bit of at its lowest point, because against the two most played decks, Emerald Steel and Ruby Amethyst, the card was very, very underwhelming. Against Emerald Steel it was just far too expensive. Against Red Purple it wasn't impactful enough to remove a single character. You didn't really have the time to play it. So it often saw the count go down to 3. I think the most telling thing about when Dragon is good or not is how much Sapphire is in the meta, how many drops that you really have to remove, like Tamatoa, maybe also the new Mufasa are in the meta. So I actually think it's gotten quite a bit better now, because I expect at least Red-Blue to be maybe second most popular deck from what we can tell right now. So I still see a lot of lists on playing only 3 dragons, mainly because people are wanting to fit in the extra T-pose as Vamp, which makes sense. Then they want to play lots of Sisus to be fighting off the early game of Daisy Duck. But I don't think Maleficent Dragon is the card you want to be making. I think we are living in a 4-dragon meta game as long as the Red-Blue mirror is important.
Yep, that makes perfect sense to me. 100%. Next comment is from Maho Basil. Verbal sparring amongst the team makes for great entertainment. Keep it up, fellas. Yeah, I had a lot of fun on last week's podcast, going back and forth with Brendan. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I remember a lot of people came up to us or came up to me and said in Toronto, oh, big fan of the podcast and stuff. I think one of the things that I enjoy the most between all of us, I've said this many times before, is that we don't always agree. I think that's really important for the podcast. Is we're not all sitting here and saying, well, it's funny because I did just agree with you on the last one, but within like there's certain things where I'll have an opinion on something, you'll have an opinion on something, and that actually creates a conversation. And it's a big reason why we do this like Spilled Ink section as well. Is like, you know what I mean? It's great to have these conversations and not everyone just saying, oh, well, yeah, this is just obviously correct. This is just obviously correct. Even if you think it's correct and it's not correct, or if something's incorrect, you want to be educated on why, it's worth having these like conversations. So yeah,
when someone is too sure about their opinion, they're usually wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, 100%.
when people say stuff like, if you don't play for Naveen, you're wrong, probably they're wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Next comment is from Timothy Kryzwanski. Probably butchering that name. Apologies. Starting with really bad removal has to be an intentional design choice to give them room to power creep. So this is in response to Brendan saying that removal in Lorcana is just like heavily overcosted. MTG removal started way too powerful versus extremely anemic threats and had to spend a bunch of time printing weaker and weaker removal into standard until they could start power creeping it again. Edit, MTG players can call stuff by card names because they do a lot of functional reprints in their game, and the easiest way to keep track of them, especially in limited, is to use an old generic name. So yeah, that makes sense. Like again, like I said, I haven't played Magic, but everyone calls like the Lady Tremaine effect an edict effect, right? Because I'm sure that effect's been printed on a multitude of different cards through like Magic's history and stuff like that, and already we're seeing it on multiple different cards within Lorcana. The edict effect, I'm assuming, is just purely based on the card your opponent chooses something to remove. But it's interesting in Lorcana that we've seen that evolve to not just being the banish mechanic, but also, with this Mother Gothel, your opponent chooses what they want to bounce with there's like the 3-cost uninkable Anna, your opponent chooses what card of theirs to exert and stuff like that. So that's definitely interesting. But yeah, naturally through all of these different types of card games, you're going to have a lot of cards that have similar effects and similar names. And I guess, I don't know, there's probably not any... Is there any Moyen that you have from like Hearthstone that you would like actually bring over? I think, I don't know, like I haven't really seen this type of card in any game, and it wouldn't really be in Lorcana, but I feel like if there was any card game I played that was just like, deal 6 damage, I'd just call it Fireball. Because it's just like, that's what it is for me, Yeah,
there's some names I guess I would carry over. I don't think the removal was crazy good in Hearthstone in general for the most part. I think we should read out the next comment as well. It's kind of on the same topic.
It's in relation to it, yeah, sure. So the next one's from White Sox MLB. Removal isn't overcosted. It just gets compared against games like Magic the Gathering, where removal is severely undercosted. The power level of every big Magic the Gathering card without an enter the battlefield effect is, who cares? It's not sticking. If you print a bunch of cheap Omni Negates, those just become the new power cards, and you've invalidated most of your design space. I'd much rather a game where cards costing more than 3 can be part of the meta. Yeah, that's quite interesting.
In total, I think they make a very good point, and I like... okay, even if we state, okay, remove it's overcosted, I guess I like the cost that it's at, so maybe it's not overcosted, but still, it is expensive, so... it just... If removal is inefficient in comparison, that basically means that you get rewarded for actually being the one putting on the pressure, and you get incentivized to try to pressure your opponent, to try to actually be proactive and play out cards. And I think in general for a big part of the player base, that is a much more enjoyable experience than sitting back and only cards with an on the play effect being playable, and then you sitting back instead of playing cards, you just hold back your cards for their best scenario, holding back the removal for the hits. And we also have already witnessed a little bit of this phenomenon where at least for the more expensive cards, we say they need to be really, really good. They need to do a lot if they're expensive and don't do anything on the play.
Yep.
Like that's already a big sign maybe the card isn't too good. Like Mufasa is a great card, but it is an expensive uninkable that doesn't really give you a lot of value on the play. So, and we don't even have the greatest removal. We're just saying it based on cards like Maleficent Dragon existing, or we don't talk about Bruno maybe.
Yeah.
And so I think I like that removal is at the efficiency rate that it's at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. Yeah, I was just even thinking back to Hearthstone for like the early days, right? Like classic. Many people in the comments will definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was like a card that people didn't value at the very start of Hearthstone was Naturalize, which is the one cost. You like destroy a minion, but then your opponent draws 2 cards. But I think people quickly realized that card's like at the start when like that's the card pool's very limited. One cost destroy a card, probably pretty good,
Yeah, so that card you could easily evaluate as, oh, I 3-for-1 myself, but there's stages where tempo is king, and then you want a 1-cost destroy something, even if they get to draw 2 cards.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, it's really an interesting point when you're kind of comparing the different card games for sure. The next comment is from James Cirques 10. During the conversation on the ramp numbers, people might be looking at the expected value of seeing a 2-cost ramp card in their opener using stats. At 6 copies, this being 4 Tipo and 2 1-jump aheads for instance, you have an EV of 0.7 in a deck of 60 cards and opening hand of 7. If you consider the mulligan and averaging 3 cards more seen per hand, so you see 10 cards total, that value increases to 1. At 7 copies, you reach an EV of 1 at 9 cards, meaning you only need to average 2 cards mulliganed. You also have 1 additional top deck, 2 on the draw, increasing these odds further. This is at least the thinking I've been using when playing Ruby Sapphire. Moyen, I'm going to let you weigh in on this because this is math numbers and ramp statistics that are beyond my tiny little brain. So let's you can educate us all.
No, it's good thought. I would just recommend to not really value EV in on this too much, and instead focus more on the chances of drawing at least 1 ramp. Generally, it's not really the end of the world to draw multiple of these ramps, as Tipo is even inkable. If you draw Tipo in a 1-jump, maybe you just play the Tipo, sing the 1-jump the turn after, go a little bit lower on the hand size, but find a way to refuel your hand, and you're golden. So I think instead of looking the average amount of ramp cards I see until turn 2, I would just try to instead calculate, okay, what's the chance I find at least 1 ramp until that turn. After that, they say, you might think then, why not just run all 8 and have the highest likelihood possible, which is very reasonable thought to have. And then he says, and that's because the 2-mana ramp cards are utterly terrible top decks outside the first 2 turns, so you want to maximize our chances of seeing 1 by turn 2, while minimizing the chance we see them in the mid to late game. So we want to run as few as possible, but still hitting a point where you can expect to have 1 in most games. So with I think we talked about this a little bit where we said, okay, with every card you add, the chance goes up, but a little bit less like in comparison to the last card you added.
Yep.
So there's maybe a critical point where adding another ramp card isn't worth the cost of including it. But yeah, this is in general, I think, very, very interesting deck building decisions where it shows again that a basic understanding of math carries over quite well into card games.
For sure, yeah. It's really interesting to think about these things when you're doing that. Like, when you're at the stage of deck building, when you're really trying to crunch numbers, like you said, it's like, okay, do I go to 2-1 jumps? Do I go to 3-1 jumps? It's like doing this math can actually be quite valuable for you to then understand, okay, this is the specific card that probably I could cut in my deck to then add something else more relevant in. So it's definitely worth understanding for sure. And the last comment we have is from Fork, which was a question that was popped into our Discord. How are teams/playtesting groups typically formed? None of my friends play Lorcana, and everyone at my locals is mostly a lone wolf pro player or have their own exclusive testing groups. I've hit the point where I don't think just grinding games is making me better and would like to meet up with people regularly to mutually build our skills, but don't know where to start. So it's definitely a tough one. I mean, myself and Moyen were just talking about this before the pod. It's even tough for us at the moment because we're all just like naturally busy with stuff, right? So like Moyen's struggling a little bit to, do some testing. And I've just been busy with the kind of other games that I'm doing at the moment. And for the most part, I find it tough because I find myself sometimes falling back on I'll just grind some games, get some reps in with a deck and I'll be fine, right? And at least that's better than nothing, sure, but it is difficult to not only just like find the people, but then find the time, right? It's good if you get that consistent, right? Every Tuesday, every Wednesday, we're gonna sit down, we're gonna practice, and we're gonna do a group. But struggling to find people, right? It's definitely tough. My recommendation, for me, I would say it was if you've popped this message into our Discord, just ask people in our Discord. I had a stage where I was testing for Toronto where myself and my testing partner, we just hopped in the general voice chat and a few people from the Discord came in and we were just grinding games and like testing out different decks. You know what I mean? I think I think, feel free to ask anyone within the community. All people will say is sorry, no. You know what I mean? It's not people saying, oh, I don't want to practice with you. You know what I mean? It's just ask people. And a place like our Discord is probably like a good place to start. If you're looking for more people within your locals, like, it can be daunting maybe a little bit. Like I remember when I first stepped into my locals, I was like, oh, like, it's a lot of new people that you're meeting for the first time. And in general, I would say card game players, while sure they come to play and to play a game, it's a bit of a weird one because some of them I'm sure are quite social, but it's also, just like this kind of like niche hobby. So some people might be a little bit more, what's the word? Reserved. That's the word that I'm looking for. Yeah. So it's definitely difficult, but I'd say don't be afraid to go up and ask people because, like I said, all they could say is no. And even if they're busy or if they go like, oh well, I know that guy wants to do testing, so maybe in the future when I want to play again, I'll hit him up. And that happens to us in locals all the time when we're like, oh, I'm busy this weekend, but if I know you want to test, then we can kind of get something going. So it's just about asking. And like I said, the worst people can say is no. So and don't ever feel bad for asking. You know what I mean? So
yeah. And even if someone already has a testing group, if you feel like you'd get along well with those guys, they don't. I think biggest factor that as Brendan said in another episode is really if those guys don't have the biggest ego, that already kind of qualifies them. It's like you get along with them, they don't have a big ego that blinds them from the truth, then I think people can be very adaptable and then just put yourself out there. Try to not be afraid to ask people.
I think if anything, for me, this is for me personally at least, I'm like, if there's any more people that I want that are trying to do like we're all trying to do the same thing. We all play the same game. If there's more people that want to try get better at the game, if you're trying to help someone, I feel like if I'm trying to test with someone, I'm not only helping myself with testing, but I'm helping them. It's like you know what I mean? You're both helping each other in a situation. It's not someone saying, oh, I want you as my test subject so I can just practice stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's usually it works both ways.
Yeah, it's a give and take, but also I think there's the misconception of I think there can definitely be the misconception of the worst player profits more of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe to an extent that's true, but I think largely people underestimate how much the person that's maybe already right now the better player, how much that guy actually learns from formulating his thoughts, from teaching his thoughts, and like he learns.
I'm sure you
just as
I mean,
much.
it's I'm sure you probably get it from coaching at some stages, right?
Definitely.
I'm sure like you doing coaching isn't just like, well, I'm the pro, I'm going to tell you exactly everything how to do it. And yes, your experience and stuff, but there's probably stuff that if someone questions you on why this and why that, as you explain it, but then they could ask you something that you never thought about before, and you're like, oh yeah, well, that's actually true. Maybe I should think about it a different way. You know what I mean? Yeah. So
the coaching definitely helps me stay sharp because first of all, I prepare the coachings, but then even the process itself, where when you then go through all the mulligans to some deviations depending on matchup, play draws, through all the matchup plans, just really properly thinking those things through, formulating it. That it's really good. So I think because of that, I think people really underestimate how much you learn from teaching.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. All right. So with that, that was the Spilled Ink section. Again, if you guys want to have your questions read out, be sure to leave a comment down below. We're going to move into the 10K tournament that took place the previous weekend. And the winner of this event was it's Brendan DeCandio. Brendan DeCandio.
Brendan, I think.
Yeah. So he won the event with Amber Steel, which is a deck that he's pretty known for playing, I think. And looking at this deck list, I found it pretty funny. Because I remember saying to Moyen, I think I said this on the podcast to you last week, but if I didn't, I think I said it to you in just on Discord chat. Amber Steel is such a funny deck to me because I feel like set to set, the changes that come into the deck, especially from set 4, right? It was like the one change was like the 1/4 Ursula, and that was it. That was like the main change that people made, and it just really shows the consistent power level of a deck like this, no matter what way. And there's always ways to build it, right? You can go for the flute line, we've seen the iterations, right? The flute line, the pride lands, the lantern, the more mid-range one. And now I think one of the biggest tools that we have seen people messing around with is this new Prince Naveen, and then also the new Peace card, which is probably like I don't know, I don't want to call it like a mirror breaker, but it can like really put your opponent in this place where, I don't know, let's say you're even just against the Ruby Amethyst, forget Amber Steel. Because I think actually, we will use this example. I think Amber Steel versus Ruby Amethyst, most of the time, the out for the Ruby Amethyst player is, I've drawn the B prep, I clear your board, I can kind of reestablish, right? Most of the time, I think that's kind of generally the way that matchup goes. So if you just say, okay, I'm pretty confident I have a B prep, slam down this Pete, what are you going to do? Like, you can literally threaten games off of this, or at least threaten to get like a whole new world off or something like that. You know what I mean? So what are your thoughts on this deck list in general, Moyen?
Well, so MSD went through some phases again in set 5. At the start, people were like, okay, do I now play both shift lines? Or do I just play the Robin Hood shift line or just the Queen line? People have moved away from playing both shift lines pretty quickly, but I think most decks would be on either of those. But we haven't really seen much item play at all. So now this one decided to play the lanterns. Because of that, also cut the shift package, but play for Naveen. And I think, so myself, I'm not too high on this specific deck list, but I think a big thought behind running the lanterns with maybe the 4 Naveen, 3 big Cinderellas is you have some really big tempo swings to ramp into, maybe a turn 4 shift instead of a turn 5 shift, but also in the mirror, sometimes it can be very hard to stick a character to really sing a removal song, and then especially if you're on the draw. So I think turn 3 Naveen plus removal spell can be one way to get a little bit more equity on the games on the draw in the mirror. So I think that's great. I still see this deck struggling against red blue because of its weakness to Sisu. But I think in this tournament particularly, DeCandio managed to dodge a lot of the red blues. Then they faced it in the finals, but the red blue opponent in the finals was playing 0 of the Sisu, completely relying on a 4B prep, and then the Pete's absolutely great at closing out the games.
Yeah, for sure. And interestingly enough as well, I've seen, very early iterations of Amber Steel, trying to go a little bit more aggressive. They'd have like the Daisy Ducks and stuff like that. This version not really opting for that. But I do agree. I think that at least the lanterns in this deck do make for, it makes the Naveen seem not so... Because usually for 4 Naveen, I'd be like, that seems like a lot. I've seen a lot of people kind of running 2, and that would be kind of standard for me. But being able to ramp into it, maybe it just means that you don't get bricked as hard, right? If you kind of have a few of these uninkables, well, if you kind of cheat a mana, you can get this out a little bit, or cheat a mana, cheat an ink, you can get this out a little bit faster. And even for the, I think the same for the Cinderella shift. I think if you can potentially shift the big Cindy on 4, that's a huge threat that a lot of decks really can't answer. So overall, I think the deck list is definitely interesting. I don't know how their deck's going to evolve over time. If there will be that little bit more aggression. I personally think, even though that this deck list won the tournament, and you can tell me your thoughts because we're going to go through the breakdown of the event here. I think that red-blue is just an extremely strong pick again to bring to events, right? I think a deck that can probably rival it the most and go really fast. I mean, obviously, I'm not really going to count hyper aggro in this instance because I just think, realistically, if you bring a deck like that, it's just going to get absolutely stomped by any steel stuff. But I think we've seen some Emerald Amethyst decks. I know we were testing a little bit at a time when that seems they can go relatively fast against a red-blue player to kind of close out the game. But in general, I just think red-blue is in such a strong position and it's just such a solid pick for a tournament. But the cool thing about it is it's not just like one version, right? There's loads of different changes you can make to red-blue. There is that kind of more heavy, I would say, kind of hard ramp control version, and then you've got the version where you play, more items. You play the Queen package. We've seen some spicy new cards be included, some of the new items and stuff like that. I know you're smiling, Moyen, because there's another red-blue list that I have on the screen in front of me, and I'm not even going to talk about it. People in the comments are going to be like, oh my god, there's the secret cool red-blue. It's trash. I'm sorry. It won an event over the weekend. It was like, what, 92 players,
62.
but 62, yeah.
Well, 62 player event that was won by.
We'll say 62 players, right? We'll say 62 players. If you really want to see the list, go into Ink Decks and have a look at it. But I just.
Okay, but I can talk about it if you refuse to.
Yeah, you could.
It's so the deck, it tries to build around the Prince John that can play items for free, also from the discard pile, and then you play all the different items that you can banish to banish a character, like Poisoned Apple, Sword of Truth, the Plank, and to control the board that way and to win off that tempo and value gain off the Prince John. I haven't played it myself, but it is very spicy and looks kind of fun.
Would this, and I could be completely wrong, would this list not even run the Queen if it's going for the whole kind of item package, right? It doesn't even have that, I guess, because the other card in the 3-drop slot in place of it is Triton, so maybe it's just trying to go super it's also got Annoy in the deck, so maybe it's like spam all of these items, cheat stuff out, and just win the game. Yeah, one Noi, exactly. Yeah.
Maybe, I think, so I don't think the deck, I mean, I don't want to be too harsh on it, but the deck doesn't seem to be built in a very coherent way.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe there's something there if you do build it in a more coherent way.
Okay, you guys heard it here first. Moyen's working on the Plank Ruby Sapphire deck, everyone. It's happening, coming next week at the podcast. Oh, man. But, okay. Do you want to jump into the we'll talk about the other deck lists from the 10K this weekend, but do you want to jump into the breakdown of, like, I don't know, we'll say, like, top 5, top 6 deck color, or ink color combinations?
Yeah, sure. So there was some other tournaments as well. Other than the 10K, there was, there was a tournament in Sweden. There was the second tournament in Poland.
Mm-hmm.
But I think all of these, they carry a lot less weight than the 10K because the 10K was 186 players.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the one we should really focus on. The most played deck was Amber Steel. Considering that it was the most played deck with 47 players, I don't think its conversion rate was anything too special. We didn't calculate it, but I think it should have had more tops with 47 players playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second most bought deck is Ruby Sapphire, and I think this is what everyone expected before that turn, or at least that's what I expected even before the tournament happened. And I don't think we have any reason to not expect these two decks to be the most played decks at the first DLCs in Set 5. And then after that, there's a little bit of a drop-off. There's 25 Ruby Amethyst, which is much more than I expected. But I don't really see it do it super well in this meta, just because of its weakness to Amber Steel. But current Ruby Sapphire lists are a little weak to the Flynn opener for sure.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. It's interesting that you say that about the Ruby Amethyst, because I'm just looking at the conversion rate, at least into top 8, and I know that's very specific, but the deck that made the most impact in top 8 was actually Ruby Amethyst, with 3 out of 8 of them being there. So that is quite interesting for sure. But I don't know, we always say this about Ruby Amethyst, right? It's like, I just think Ruby Amethyst fundamentally is just always going to be a good deck, a strong deck. It's going to have a good matchup for the most part into some slower decks. But I also do, it's the whole conversation that we had in the previous set, right? It's like, I think you can still tech Ruby Sapphire to be comfortable into the matchup. Not favored, but definitely comfortable.
Yeah, and the problem is Red Purple doesn't have super bad matchups, but Ember Steel really is not one you want to see. And then the other decks weren't played as much. It's 12 Sapphire Steel, 9 Emerald Steel, 9 Emerald Amethyst, 8 Amethyst Steel, and then a little bit more of a drop-off. So these decks, there's definitely a drop-off in comparison to the most played decks, but there is some variety in what color combinations were brought around 10 times.
Some absolute maniac brought a mono Emerald deck. That's trying to go Giga Discard, probably.
I guess also definitely worth a mention is we had in total 5 Amber Amethyst, which was at least in early set 5 it was the Boogeyman. I think we very early said we think it's going to drop in popularity basically because of Amber Steel. I don't see any player that thinks too highly of themselves really bringing Amber Amethyst to a DLC, and with 5 out of 186 players, it was around 3% of the meta. So, yes, aggro got some tools, but I think at the end of the day, you don't have to overreact. Your deck doesn't have to beat aggro to be viable in this meta.
No, and that's the thing. I think as we look at the upcoming DLCs, I think people will definitely bring it. But again, and this is to not offend anyone, if you enjoy playing aggro, bring it as a deck. But I do think you really have to evaluate if it's a deck you really want to consider bringing. There will be a lot of Amber Steel. But nevertheless, I do think that with the additions that the package got, like there's a chance, at least in the first few rounds, that we could run into some in Birmingham. I'm sure there's going to be a few that are going to pop up in Vegas as well. But yeah, like it's very interesting, because if we compare this to the previous set, the top 3 deck lists are kind of still there, but just reordered, right? At least just taking this one tournament look for kind of a meta overview, right? Amber Steel has really risen to the top now, which again, it's so interesting because it's not getting these crazy additions. The baseline of Amber Steel is just so strong that you just add 1 or 2 tools and it's still going to be a great deck. I think Sapphire Ruby, in my opinion, got some of the coolest additions this set in general. I think the Tipo is such an incredible card. I think the fact that you can build a deck in so many different ways to try and combat the meta and stuff like that is super interesting. So it's a shame, because I would love to try some Sapphire Ruby, but that color combination is reserved in my collection for my fiance. So
yeah, it's I guess, I mean, I've been loving every single meta so far that we've had. The one critique, I guess, that's kind of emerging is I'd love to see some different color combinations rise to the top. It feels like even if all of these color combinations got a few new tools, the color combinations that are played the most still didn't really change too much over the last few sets. So I guess that's something I would love to see in the upcoming sets.
Yeah, I was actually just double checking as well. There were only 6 Amber Emeralds within that 10k, which is a bit sad for me, I have to say. I was very happy to see that deck win the DLC Toronto, but I don't know, it's tough. I feel like if your metagame is Ruby Sapphire and Amber Steel at the top, I think it's really tough to bring that deck. It was really good into like a Ruby Amethyst heavy meta, but I don't know. I've talked to a lot of people. I think you can tech the deck slightly against Amber Steel to try and beat it. If you basically get your Under the Sea combo off, you can definitely win the game. But now again, it's like, okay, so your deck is predicated on like this combo card to win you the game. Oh, I see they have an Ariel and a Prince John on the board. What card shall I play? Pete, I win the game. It's like, it's like now that Pete's a card that can just shut down stuff like that. It's very difficult to bring a deck like Amber Emerald. So I'm a little bit disappointed because I did want to test it a little bit in set 5, and now I don't think I'm even going to test it that much. But people in the comments, please prove me wrong. If you think there's ways to tech the deck to beat stuff, let me know. But right now I don't see it. Another card I want to ask you about, Moyen, because I've seen it included in some red-blue lists, but not all. It's a new set 5 card, Cusco. What are your thoughts on this 6-drop Cusco? Do you think it's relevant to include as a one or two of to kind of tech against those location cards? Do you think maybe foreseeing the decline in Ruby Amethyst, do you think that Ruby Sapphire can handle it without the Cusco? Is it relevant against items, etc.?
I think I don't think it's in there to tech for locations. I think if it was just locations, we'd still be playing 1 or 2 Vitalis Spheres. To maybe a Queen of Hearts or Ruby Comic Con. I think it's kind of clunky for that reason, and the early casters you can't really Cusco efficiently anyways. I think it's mostly in there to get a lot of equity in the mirror, where suddenly you can't drop your dime early, or if you do, the player having a Cusco, maybe digging for the Cusco with a vision to the future, can really, really punish them. I think there's a fair shout to be had maybe for the Hideaway as well, as it can enable you to do some other things in the same turn with the 4 ink you spare. Also, I mean, this shouldn't come up all that often when you're playing 4 Tipo and a few 1-jumps, but maybe sometimes when you miss on all of those and you have a Hideaway, maybe you just ramp and put your Popsicle away.
Maybe, so, yeah.
I'm not too high on either of these cards, but unfortunately, if you're playing red-blue and you're expecting red-blue to be one of the 2 most played decks, you probably have to include a few of those. So it's kind of like red-blue as a color would be stronger if you wouldn't care about the mirror, but there's more value in caring about the mirror. It's a little bit like the Ruby Amethyst players when they were like, yeah, our deck would be so much better, like in previous sets, our deck would be so much better if we just didn't play spellbooks, but then you play against someone with spellbooks, and they will have a lot of edge in the mirror. You can't really allow that.
Yeah, it's really interesting when it comes to these like tech cards in Ruby Sapphire, because there's so many of them for so many different kind of decks. Like I think I'm a little bit sad that we haven't got to see the Ruby Chromicon shine as much as I kind of thought it would this set. But at the end of the day, the reason for that is that I do think it's just like a tech card. In general, that card in Ruby Sapphire, it's not mind-blowing. Oh, like you just rather play a Popsicle every single time to actually like replace itself and draw a card, right? But in the situations where it's good, I'm sure it is good, but like those situations are probably 95% combo with Maui, and that's it. To take out Castle, like sure, I guess maybe it makes the card becomes better if you play more rush cards. So maybe if you play like Queen of Hearts in the 2-drop slot and you've got Ruby Chromicons, you can because I think there's a lot of cards in Lorcana that have that kind of 3 willpower threshold that you want to maybe try and take out. But it's interesting. We're getting to the stage where there's so many cards that you're considering, do I put it in this Ruby Sapphire deck? Do I take it out? And then when you want to play a more item focused deck anyways, there's a lot of the deck becomes a different deck, right? There's a lot of things that you just have to take out. So yeah, definitely interesting for sure. What else is there here? There's another Ruby Sapphire list here. This is the one I actually want to talk about. So it's the one that came second in the 10K over the weekend. And I showed this to Kim Moyen, and I wanted to get her thoughts. And she saw 3 Scar and she went crazy. She was like, "Oh my god, it's amazing! I love Scar," because Scar is one of her favorite cards. But this version is, I think the key thing that I can see that's been taken out is we don't have any How Far I'll Go, right? And that's a card that I know for a fact that you're fairly high on, right?
Yeah, you don't catch me not playing How Far I'll Go.
Yeah, for sure. So what's your thoughts on this list in particular? Because like there are a lot of cards in here that are 3 Scar, 3 Mufasa, 3 Chicha,
Yeah, it's very different to maybe the stock red-blue build of set 5. Biggest difference is instead of playing small Sisus, ice blocks, and big Sisus as their removal package. They're just playing 4 Be Prepareds, which then opened up a lot of uninkable space, and they've decided to use it for both Chicha, which can contest early flints against red purple, and set up an early draw engine if you're going to the Fishbone Quill. With Chicha into Quill being their plan, maybe they value the Hofargo a bit less, and then also they use those uninkable slots to play Scar as their removal, which Scar also someone that can be left up after a few trades to maybe saying Be Prepared, but it's also a card that profits of ice blocks. I'm not sure it still fits the power curve of maybe the game at this time. And then also they're playing 3 Mufasa, so they have great threat density, and with 7 big 8 drops, I'm not sure the threat density is all that needed in red-blue. I think the deck fundamentally doesn't need to play a lot of threats because it just wins inevitably by playing characters that remove characters at some point. And so I'm not too sure on that, and I expect I assume it really got punished by the Peats in the final against an Ember Steel with 4 Peats. I think one big thing about the Mufasa though is if people decided to play World's Greatest Criminal Mind, or even if they don't, when you're playing red-blue against Ember Steel, sometimes you'd be like, okay, if I can play this and I know if I can play this Tamatoa and I know it doesn't get removed, and they don't have the Criminal Mind, this is my best play here. But maybe I'm not allowed to actually play down my Tamatoa, because if it gets World's Greatest Criminal Minded, I immediately lose the game from that tempo loss. And the Mufasa gets around that quite nicely. So there's definitely something to be said about that.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely interesting. And the last deck that I want to kind of talk about here is the Ruby Amethyst deck. So this one came 3rd in the 10K, and very little things have changed about this deck list, at least in this version that we're looking at right now. There's one big Sisu, which the big Sisu in Ruby Amethyst, I do think this probably does, like we're saying, right? This does help the Amber Steel matchup a little bit, to have one in there that you can kind of clear their board a little bit easier. And they've opted to put in two of the library into this deck. And we talked about this card as well. We said, I think I'm sure it synergizes quite nicely with the 1-drops that replace themselves, right? Because then suddenly you're going to be drawing 2 cards from that as well. Maybe would like to see Cusco included in this list if you're going to be running the library anyways. Maybe it's a little bit too slow. It's not really part of what your game plan's trying to do. But I think the combination of at least maybe 2 library and all of these 1-drops that replace themselves is fine. And clearly it did well, right?
Yeah, so the library is, of course, synergies well with Boom and Followers. But I think in itself it can be a little bit slow of a threat, and then you can only ever draw 1 out of this moving action. But I think one big downside of the library is it kind of incentivizes you to play for Boom, for Followers, your 1-drops. And with Emma Steel being the most played deck, maybe you would want to be playing 1/3s to get around Cinderella Stormrage on, to stick something into Madame Mim potentially. So I think while in a vacuum, 4 for Boom and a few libraries sounds very good, maybe in this Ember Steel dominated meta, we'd rather not play libraries and play a few 1/3s instead.
Yeah, it's also just that type of card where I think this is something that we talked about already, is it's like as a 3-drop, it's like, where do you really fit it in? Like, I feel like if you've got the option to do the Flynn Sisu line, you're probably always going to take that over the library line. But maybe not against like Amber Steel specifically. Maybe the library is a little bit better. But then if you're against Amber Steel and they kill your 1-drops, you've got nothing you're moving to the library. So they'll just eventually, over the course of a turn or two, use their cards to take out the library. So maybe it's a little bit better against Amber Steel than at least a Flynn Sisu, but I don't know. Like if I'd be curious if that's the reasoning why this player decided to include it in their list, if they thought it was specifically good in that matchup, you know.
What I will say is I definitely love the 1-off Sisu, the big Sisu. I mean, I like when people are not afraid to put 1-offs in their deck. I think the first copy is significantly better than the second copy of that card, so I commend that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, yeah, and then with that, that's all of the deck lists from the tournament this weekend. Like I said, stay tuned. Next Tuesday, we're going to have the Lorecast, which again, we're assuming is going to be set 6. When are they going to get the Podcana crew on to do this Lorecast, Moyen, eh?
I don't know.
Honestly, yeah. We'd be great. If you guys want it to happen, the power of the people, let them know, honestly. Let them know if you guys want to see one of us. It would be really, really cool to talk about new cards and stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Bit of a short one for you guys this week, but again, I don't think there's too much more to be said besides the tournaments that happened over the weekend, the deck list we've seen. There's not like too much crazy meta development. I think over the next 2 weeks, I'm hoping to see, a little bit more experimentation as we approach these Disney Lorcana challenges. Moyen, before we close it out, is there any particular deck lists you've been testing that you're maybe a little bit higher on that haven't really been represented in these tournaments so far? I know previously, you were testing out the green purple stuff. So this is the thing I'll actually say. So I think the chase legendary so far besides Naveen has still been this Clarabelle, and Clarabelle is clearly powerful, but so far we've seen, like, is it powerful enough to actually kind of creep its way into the meta? I think it will eventually. Maybe it's just not being represented enough. But in general, I'm going to kind of focus on this Clarabelle card. Do you think it excels more in, probably excels just as well in both, in kind of the Emerald Amethyst package or the Emerald Steel package? Because in Emerald Amethyst, you're kind of slowly drawing cards anyways, right? Emerald Steel, maybe you're comboing that with a little bit more aggression. I don't know. Let's just say you're playing Emerald Steel, but you've got some Merfolk and you're kind of throwing down some stuff, and then you put the Clarabelle to kind of get some cards back, right? What are your thoughts on this card in general? Kind of really, I don't know, making its way onto the marketplace rather than the meta right now.
Yeah. So I mean, it's probably best in Emerald Sapphire, but that deck's so built around that maybe that deck's worse than the other decks at the end of it. But Clarabelle's great in that deck, and it's much more impactful in Emerald Steel, I would say, because Emerald Steel can much better use their hand size to generate tempo by singing removal spells, but also maybe shifting Diablo earlier. But yeah, it just rounds off Emerald Amethyst very well. In Emerald Amethyst, you don't play it all that often, but just the threat of it existing makes your opponent play a little bit differently. And it gives you so many different ways to fuel your hand and to draw cards that is really, really tough to play around. So it does have its place in 3 different decks right now. All 3 of those decks are just like not tier 1, but they're still pretty good decks.
Yeah, the Emerald Amethyst deck, I believe, actually, we're talking about that other tournament in Sweden, right? It did win that one, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. It won that tournament, so still a notable deck to think about. If it's like more of your playstyle, definitely give it a shot. But yeah, it's just like, it's a fine deck list, but I just don't know how it contends against the meta, because I feel like a lot of the Emerald Amethyst that we've seen, I mean, we tested the matchup before, Moyen, right? It's like you play Emerald Amethyst into red blue. It's not as fast as it used to be by any means. It's way more focused on steady tempo.
Yeah,
slow. I think it just punishes like the faster decks more so than the slower decks, for sure.
It's the way it's currently built. It's great at punishing the fast decks. The problem it faces is the more Banzais and Merfolks you put into that deck, the better it gets against red blue, and the worse it gets against Ember Steel.
Yeah.
And it can't really build itself in a way where it gets better against red blue without hurting the other matchup. So that is a tough battle that deck's currently in.
Yeah. So honestly, and I'm just thinking out loud here, if we think that Amber Steel is kind of the cream of the crop right now, and Ruby Sapphire's up there as well, we might have to start cooking some Amethyst Steel stuff again. Because honestly, I think Amethyst Steel, back in the day, I remember when Zan started to play it, right? Zan built Amethyst Steel to try and counter the Amber Steel decks, right? And in turn, I remember at the first DLC in Lille, it was also quite good into the red blue decks, because it'd go pretty fast, right? You've got Smee in the deck, you've got Goat, you can kind of turn on the gas in the deck a little bit more than like, I don't know. I just think Smee fundamentally, if you're looking at a card that's gonna race to beat red blue, and even against amber steel, it's just gonna survive, right? It's a good body that's gonna quest for a lot against red blue, and against amber steel, they're not gonna have a clean way to remove it unless they specifically have, you know, what is it? Strength of Raging Fire, right? To kind of clean it up. So there could be some potential in trying to make that work, but I was also saying to Moyen before we started this podcast, I was looking at some Amethyst Steel decks that were brought to some of these tournaments, and so far I'm just not really impressed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, I don't really see them beating Amethyst Steel, to be honest. I think one nice thing that Amethyst Steel definitely has gotten is the interaction between Tinkerbell Giant Fairy and then the new one-drop Cogsworth. When you give that, like giving that Tinkerbell Rush can be a huge tempo swing.
yeah. That's definitely a cool one. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we see something. I don't think that deck is gonna get much better than what it is at the moment and what it kind of has been for a while. But I hope people prove me wrong, because I do love that deck, that in color combination. But yeah, that's it, guys. Thank you so much for watching this week. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, leave us a review on your pod platform of choice, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all that jazz. There's a video version of this over at youtube.com/@Podcana podcast. I've been Kawa. That's been Moyen. Moyen. Is it Moyen at Moyen HS or at Moyen _HS?
Yeah, Moyen_HS.
Moyen_HS, Kawatech_CG. The links will be down in the description. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and we'll catch you in the next one.